They thought my silence meant weakness. They never realized it was aim. So I spent 3 weeks planning the kind of New Year's Eve party you only see on those lifestyle blogs that make you feel like your life smells like old takeout. I had fairy lights, hot cocoa stations, playlists curated by mood, even printed invitations, real ones, with gold lettering and everyone's names spelled right. I thought maybe this year my family would actually show up. Maybe we'd laugh again like we used to before Dad decided emotions were too expensive. By 7, everything was glowing. My little house looked like it belonged to someone who had their life together. I even bought a black velvet jumpsuit, the kind you wear when you finally start believing you deserve attention. My boyfriend Ethan kissed my forehead and said, "You've done enough." It was supposed to sound sweet, but it felt like a warning, like even he knew what was coming. At 7:30, no one. 8 hunquak, still nothing. I texted Mom, no reply. Group chat, dead silent. You ever watch your phone long enough that your reflection starts looking like a fool? That was me, every minute a little more humiliated. I told myself traffic was bad, or maybe they got the address wrong, except they didn't. I double-checked. Twice. By 8:45, Ethan offered to run out and grab more ice. He said, just in case people show up late. I laughed, pretending to believe him. When he left, I took a photo of the backyard, perfectly lit, waiting, and sent it to the family chat. It stayed unread. Midnight hit like a joke no one laughed at. The fireworks outside sounded like mockery. I sat by the fire pit with a glass of champagne I didn't even sip. The heat lamp buzzed above me like a dying bee, throwing light over food no one would eat. You know what's worse than being stood up? Being stood up by people who share your DNA. I didn't cry, not yet. I just stared at the empty chairs and thought, maybe this is what freedom feels like before it starts to hurt. The next morning, my phone stayed quiet. Mom didn't call. Lisa, my younger sister, the one I'd bailed out of nursing school debt more times than I can count, didn't text either. I checked their socials. Mom posted a photo of her quiet night in, while Lisa commented heart emojis under it. That's when I knew it wasn't an accident. It was coordinated. By Monday, I stopped checking my messages. Then Dad texted. Send $8,000 for Lisa's baby shower deposit. We chose the Westlake Lounge. No apology, no mention of New Year's, just a command, like I was the family ATM with a nice signature. I stared at it for a while, then sent him $5, with a note that said confetti. I know it sounds petty, but when you've been the peacekeeper for too long, pettiness feels like revolution. What they didn't know was that night, while everyone ignored me, I started replaying every favor I'd ever done for them. Lisa's tuition, Mom's overdue bills, Dad's so-called emergency business loans. Every dollar was a receipt for my silence. And suddenly, silence felt like the biggest scam of all. I used to think being the dependable one made me strong. Turns out, it just made me convenient. And that night, under the empty glow of those heat lamps, I made myself a promise. If kindness was going to cost me everything, then I was done paying. So the morning after that party that wasn't, I woke up to the smell of burnt champagne and disappointment. Ethan was already gone for work, and the living room still looked like a Hallmark ad for loneliness. Perfect table setting, half-melted candles, and one untouched bottle of cider. I remember thinking, maybe they'll text me today, maybe there's an explanation. But there wasn't, just the same blue bubbles that never turned gray. Around noon, my dad called. He didn't ask how the party went. He didn't even mention New Year's. He just said, "Hey kiddo, can you wire $8,000 to your sister's baby shower account? Venue needs a deposit today." Like I was some kind of emotional vending machine that also had Venmo. I told him I'd think about it, and he gave this little laugh I hadn't heard since high school, the kind that said, "You'll cave, you always do." But this time, something in me snapped. I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking, but not from guilt. More like my body finally realized it had rights. I pulled up my banking app, scrolled through my transaction history, and the pattern hit me like a slap. Monthly tuition payments, rent transfers labeled emergency help, hospital bills I didn't remember agreeing to. Every line was a receipt for the years I'd been their backup plan. I used to think love meant showing up no matter what it cost. Turns out, I was just their overdraft protection. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the cafe near my office. The owner, Marcy, this older lady who'd seen more family drama than daytime TV, noticed my face. She said, "You look like someone just canceled Christmas." I told her about the party, about the money, and she just nodded, like she'd heard this story 1,000 times before. Then she said, "Honey, some people don't love you. They just love the version of you that pays the bills." It hit harder than any insult my dad could have thrown at me. That night, I pulled up Lisa's university portal. I'd been the one paying her nursing tuition, quietly, every semester, every late fee. I only did it because she'd cried one night about how mom would lose it if she found out she'd failed a class. I thought I was helping her stand on her feet. Turns out, I'd been building the floor she walked all over me with. I called the financial office pretending to be her aunt, because apparently being too responsible gets you demoted to that. The woman on the line told me something that made my stomach turn. The payments weren't just processed, they were rerouted. Someone had changed the refund email last month. Guess whose it was? My father's. That man had been pulling my money, pocketing it, and then spinning a story about me being controlling with cash. He was stealing from me, then using that theft as proof I was selfish. It's almost poetic, if poetry were written by people who never paid child support. When I told Ethan, he just stared. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. And I said, for the first time, nothing. Because reacting was how they controlled me. They'd throw chaos my way, and I'd clean it up before the smoke cleared. I wasn't doing that anymore. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet. Yes, I'm that kind of angry. And I logged every dollar I'd ever sent. It wasn't about the money, it was about reclaiming the narrative. My therapist once said guilt is just control in a fancy coat. I finally understood. I was done renting peace from people who never earned it. 2 days later, Mom called. Her voice was syrupy, fake sweet. "Clara, honey, your father's been under a lot of pressure. Don't make things harder." I wanted to laugh. The man lies, steals, and weaponizes kindness. And I'm the problem? I didn't argue. I just said, "I know, Mom. He's good at pressure. He's been applying it my whole life." Then I hung up. For once, she didn't call back. That night, I lit a single candle from the leftover party decor, right there on my kitchen counter. The wax dripped slow, quiet, steady. And I thought, this is what clarity feels like. Not fireworks, not revenge, just the stillness that comes when you finally stop apologizing for being tired. But make no mistake, I wasn't done. I was just getting calm enough to aim. So, a week after finding out my dad had basically turned my kindness into a side hustle, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Lisa. It just said, "Can we talk? It's about Dad." No emojis, no fake heart, nothing. That's how I knew it was serious. We met at a diner off Highway 8, the kind that smells like burnt coffee and desperation. She looked pale, thinner than I remembered, her hands fidgeting with the sugar packets like she was trying to organize her guilt. Before she even sat down, she said, "Dad told me you're planning to ruin him." I laughed out loud, probably too loud. "Ruin him? Lisa, he's doing that just fine on his own." She hesitated, then told me something that made my stomach twist. Dad had borrowed money from people you don't borrow money from, the kind of people who send reminders through broken car windows. He'd promised to pay it back using funds from a family asset, which apparently meant me. "He told them you'd help," she said, her voice small. "That you always do." And in that moment I realized this wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. It was survival for him and collateral damage for me. The next day I got an anonymous email. Just one line. "He's keeping records at his old office. You'll want to see them." No name, no signature. I should have ignored it, but curiosity and anger make a dangerous team. So that night, I called Lisa. "You still got Dad's old keychain?" I asked. She paused, then sighed. "You're insane," she said, but she met me anyway. At 9:00 p.m., we parked 2 blocks away from the old building. A gray 2-story with boarded-up windows and a faded sign that said Henderson Logistics. Snow was falling, the kind that muffles everything, even bad ideas. We crept up the metal stairs, our breaths fogging the air. The keypad still worked, because of course it did. Dad was too cheap to change it. Inside it smelled like dust and old secrets. 1 desk, 1 chair, and a single laptop sitting dead center like a trap. I half expected a camera to blink at us. Lisa whispered, "Let's just grab something and go." But I couldn't. I needed to know how deep it went. I powered the laptop on, and there it was, a folder called Burn Files. Inside were spreadsheets, wire transfers, names I didn't recognize. Some were politicians, some were companies, and then, tucked between them, ours. Clara Jennings, Lisa Jennings, Ethan Brooks. My blood went cold. There were notes, dates, amounts, even screenshots of my texts. Every time I'd helped them, Dad had logged it like inventory. Under my name, there was a note. Will pay if guilted hard enough. Lisa covered her mouth, whispering, "Oh my God." That's when we heard it. A door slammed downstairs. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, like someone who knew we were there. I yanked the flash drive out, stuffed it in my coat, and motioned for Lisa to move. We slipped down the side stairs, boots slipping on ice, hearts pounding so loud it felt like we were dragging sirens behind us. We didn't stop running until we hit the car. Lisa was shaking, muttering, "He's gonna kill us, Clara. You don't understand." I started the engine, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. "No," I said, voice trembling but steady. "I finally do." The whole drive home, we didn't speak. The only sound was the heater whirring and Lisa's breathing, uneven and scared. Back at my place, I plugged in the flash drive, every file loaded like a punch to the gut. Dad had been working with a guy named Mason Vell, a name I'd seen before, in local news stories about consulting firms that were really fronts for laundering money. Mason wasn't just his friend, he was his boss, and apparently, I'd been the unwitting investor keeping their mess afloat. At 2 a.m., Ethan came downstairs, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked. I just stared at the screen and said, "I think my father's been selling our family piece by piece." He didn't know what to say, and honestly, neither did I. I felt sick, angry, terrified, but also weirdly alive. Like after years of swallowing guilt, I'd finally tasted truth, and it was bitter, but it was mine. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept seeing that line, "Will pay if guilted hard enough." It was like Dad had written my entire childhood in a spreadsheet. The late-night calls, the fake emergencies, the "You're our rock" speeches, they were all transactions. And maybe the saddest part wasn't that he'd betrayed me. It's that he'd calculated it. So yeah, we broke into a building, we stole back our own lives. And as crazy as it sounds, for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like the victim anymore. I felt like someone with leverage. 3 days after we broke into Dad's office, Lisa disappeared. No warning, no note, just gone. Her phone went straight to voicemail, her apartment door was unlocked, and her car sat in the parking lot with frost covering the windshield like it had been untouched for days. Mom called me crying, saying, "Her purse is still here, Clara, even her wallet." The cops came, asked a few questions, scribbled notes, and left like it was just another Tuesday. But I knew this had Mason written all over it. When you steal from a man like that, even by accident, he doesn't let it slide. That night, a box showed up on my porch. No return address, no handwriting, just my name typed on a white sticker. Inside was Lisa's baby monitor. The light was on. When I picked it up, a man's voice whispered, calm, almost polite, "Stop digging, Clara. One more move, and you're next." The monitor hissed with static before cutting off completely. I stood there for a full minute, holding that stupid piece of plastic, realizing this wasn't a family problem anymore. It was war. Ethan wanted to call the police. He even had his phone in hand, but I stopped him. "They'll just file it under domestic drama," I said. "Nobody believes a daughter when she says her dad's laundering money." He stared at me, torn between logic and fear. "Then what do we do?" I didn't have an answer yet, but fear and anger make a pretty good brainstorming team. So I called in a favor from someone who actually owed me one. Julia, an old coworker from a tech startup I'd helped years ago. She'd left corporate life for consulting, which was code for cybersecurity jobs that sometimes skirted legality. When I told her what happened, she didn't even sound surprised. "Your dad's old partner, Mason Vell? That guy's been laundering money through shell companies for years. But here's the fun part. He keeps everything on an offline server, physical backup, no cloud." "How do you know that?" I asked. She chuckled. "Because I set up the damn encryption for him back when he was pretending to run a vape shop." It was the first time in weeks I almost laughed. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying," she replied, "if you want proof, you already have it. That flash drive you stole, it's the key. But if you want to bury him, you'll need to go public." Going public. The phrase sounded insane. I wasn't a hacker. I wasn't even brave. I was just exhausted. But maybe that's the same thing. So that night, I did something Dad never expected. I went transparent. I copied every file, every note, and sent them to 3 people: Julia, a local journalist who'd once covered financial fraud in our county, and a friend of mine at a law firm who still owed me from a messy divorce case I'd helped with years ago. I added a message: if anything happens to me, publish everything. Then, because petty revenge is sometimes the best kind, I left one small file untouched in Dad's email drafts. No subject line, just one sentence: if you're reading this, I stopped paying. The next morning, the world started catching up. News broke about a Midwestern laundering ring tied to public officials. Mason's name was all over it. They froze his assets, raided his storage units, and someone leaked surveillance photos from his office. By noon, my phone was blowing up. Mom, Dad, even people from high school who never liked me. But not Lisa. Not once. When I finally heard from her, it wasn't a call. It was a voicemail. Her voice was shaky, quiet. I didn't disappear. I left. I had to. Mason was going down and Dad told me to run. I'm sorry, Clara, for everything. And then silence. No location, no goodbye. That night, I sat in my living room with the baby monitor on the coffee table, watching the little green light flicker. I wasn't scared anymore, just tired. There's a point where fear stops being a feeling and becomes background noise, like the hum of a fridge you only notice when it stops. Mom showed up the next day, mascara smudged, holding a folder full of papers. Your father's gone, she said. The bank froze everything. They found out he'd been wiring money under my name. Her hands were shaking as she spoke. He took $30,000, Clara. I didn't even know until they called. She looked up at me with watery eyes. You were right. For once, I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt sad, because being right in a family like mine always came with loss attached. I told her to stay the night, but she shook her head. I can't, not yet. She left with the same silence she came with. Later that evening, Julia texted, It's done. The files are safe. You did good. I didn't respond right away. I just stared out at my backyard, the heat lamp still standing from that New Year's party no one showed up to. The snow had covered the patio lights, soft and cold, but when I plugged the lamp back in, it flickered, then glowed steady and warm. It's funny, for so long I thought peace looked like forgiveness, like family dinners and forced smiles. Turns out, peace looks a lot like standing alone in the cold with a working heat lamp and no one left to lie to you. Ethan came outside, wrapped his arms around me, and whispered, It's over. I didn't answer right away. I just looked up at the stars, so bright they almost looked fake, and said, No, it's finally beginning. It's been 6 months since everything burned down, metaphorically and a little bit literally. The investigation wrapped, the headlines faded, and people moved on to the next scandal. But me, I didn't move on. I rebuilt, quietly, slowly, without the noise of people who only loved me when I was paying for dinner. Sometimes, peace feels like guilt at first, like you're betraying someone just by being okay. But then one morning, you wake up, make your own coffee, pay your own bills, and realize it's not betrayal, it's recovery. Mom calls me every Sunday now. It's never long, just weather updates, small talk about her new job at the library, sometimes a you should visit soon. There's still distance, but it's softer now, like she finally understands silence isn't punishment, it's healing. Lisa, on the other hand, sent one postcard from Oregon. It had a picture of Mount Hood on it, and 2 words written in her messy handwriting. Still breathing, no apology, no explanation, and somehow, that was enough. Dad's gone, the last anyone heard. He'd fled the state right before the indictments hit. They froze his accounts, repossessed the car he didn't own, and seized the consulting firm he used to launder Mason's money. I didn't celebrate. I just read the news, closed the tab, and thought, that's one less number I'll ever have to block again. Julia stopped by a few weeks later. She handed me a thumb drive, said, the last copy, the real one. I wiped everything else. I asked her why. She smirked, that half-tired grin people get when they've seen too much. Because you won. Don't ruin it by keeping score. Then she left, no goodbye, no promises to stay in touch. And maybe that's what survival looks like in grown-up terms. People exiting your life quietly once the fire's out. Some nights, I still replay that New Year's Eve. The one where nobody showed up. I used to think that was the lowest point of my life. The moment everyone decided I wasn't worth showing up for. But now I see it differently. That night wasn't the end of something. It was the start of me learning that being alone isn't the same as being unloved. Sometimes it's the first sign you're finally free. Ethan and I still live in the same house. He jokes that it's haunted, not by ghosts, but by bad memories. I just laugh and tell him, then good, at least they're trapped here instead of in my head. We planted a small vegetable garden out back this spring. Every morning I water the tomatoes while he makes coffee, and the light hits the old heat lamp from that party, the one I never threw away. It's rusty now, dented from the storm that came through in March, but when I plug it in, it still flickers on. Still warm, still working, like me. Last week, Mom sent a photo. She'd cleaned out the attic and found one of my old report cards. "You always got A's," she wrote, "even when things were bad." I almost replied with something snarky, but instead I just said, "Guess I finally passed the hardest class." Because I did. The class where you learn boundaries, where you stop earning love with debt and start demanding it with respect. If you asked me what the lesson was in all of this, I'd tell you it's simple. Stop trying to save people who enjoy drowning, because while you're busy throwing them ropes, they're cutting holes in your boat. I used to think forgiveness was the ultimate win. Now I think it's clarity. And clarity means finally seeing that sometimes family isn't blood. It's whoever helps you heal without keeping receipts. The night before my 31st birthday, I stood on the back porch with Ethan. The air was warm, the lamp glowing again, and the sky looked like someone spilled gold dust across it. I told him, "You know what's funny? For years, I wanted a big celebration. People, lights, noise. But now, this is enough." He kissed my forehead and said, "You learned to show up for yourself. That's the real party." So yeah, maybe I never got the New Year's Eve I planned. But in the end, I got something better, a new start. No champagne, no applause, just peace, earned the hard way. And when I think about everything that happened, every lie, every betrayal, every empty chair that night, I don't feel bitterness anymore. I just feel grateful, because if none of it happened, I might still be the woman begging people to come to a party that was never for me in the first place. Now I throw my own kind of celebration, quiet mornings, steady hearts, no guests required. If I had to sum it all up, I'd say this story isn't really about revenge. It's about release. For most of my life, I mistook silence for peace and sacrifice for love. I thought that being the one who holds the family together made me strong, but all it really did was teach the people around me that my boundaries were optional. Sometimes, the hardest part of healing isn't walking away from the ones who hurt you. It's realizing you don't owe them an explanation for doing it. What I learned is this: you can't fix people who profit from your forgiveness. You can only fix the part of yourself that believed you had to. And once you do, you start to see how peace doesn't always come with apologies or closure. It comes with distance, clarity, and the courage to stop picking up the phone. As my mom used to say, you can't pour from an empty cup. Turns out she was right. To anyone listening who's ever been guilt-tripped, manipulated, or made to feel small for setting boundaries, remember this: gold doesn't fear the fire. If you're walking through it, it's probably because you're being refined, not ruined. They finally reached out a few months later. I forgave them, but this time, on my terms. If this story hit a nerve or reminded you of your own, share it in the comments. I'd love to hear what you've overcome. Don't forget to like this video if it made you feel something, and subscribe so you don't miss more stories about strength, justice, and starting over. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you find your peace. The quiet kind, the earned kind, the kind no one can take from you.